absolument insupportable.
Ah oui, mais...
Alors que, moi, avec le truc qu'on a à l'école...
Alors, partager. Donc, mais regarde déjà. Partager. Nouveau partage. Perrier. Partager. History. Ça, c'est et nouveau partage. Voilà. Normalement, ils y sont. Tu vérifieras tout à l'heure.
Oui. Tu me laisses ça, je vais commencer par là, de toute façon.
Non. Ja. Avez sorti. Le restaurant, regarde sur la cuisine. Manu ou
Il y a des cas particuliers où les parents ne peuvent pas financer et pas avoir un moment de concentration.
on peut donner quand elle va, on peut donner quand elle est malade, on peut donner d'autres.
Et il y a
Mais en fait, c'est les messages que j'ai pratiqués. Les messages. Je vais le refaire. Je voulais attendre un peu de savoir si je venais de bien, d'ailleurs, je sais pas. Je vais le faire. Mais à chaque situation, émission nous, ça peut être déjà long. On a ça à partir du moment où tu peux, c'est interdit. Un encore.
Nearly all the members of the groups from Hanoi and Ho Chi Minh City are now online, So that's a pleasure to meet you again for this session, which is session number 3 of the course. Just remember that we had 2 sessions last week, and we'll have another session, which is number 4 tomorrow, which is Tuesday the 30th, and another one on Thursday, which is December the 2nd, will be in December. So I will teach the 3 days, of course, but I will use part of the session of the second to give you some information on the cases, the presentations, the reports. It means the work, the assignment, as you prefer, you have to go through in the 3 weeks to come. So now, I hope you remember what you have done. We have done together on Friday and Saturday last week, the 26th and the 22nd of November. And just to remind you what we did, we, after a brief presentation with syllabus, which was slides 109, we went through short presentations of the different topics, and we have a shorter presentation there, which is called slides number 15. And then we moved during the session 1 to the BSN Danone case, which is Danone history explained throughout the financial results. And it was the first step with the merger done, organized to create the group, with after that the financial operation, strategic and financial operation on Saint-Gobain, which is one of the main examples we find in the literature anyway. Last time, session number 2, we went into 3 topics, in fact. The first one was the horizontal acquisitions and reorganization, restructure, merger. The second one was vertical integration with the also friendly. All the operations we studied last time were friendly operations. Saint-Gobain was a hostile bid. We went through the choice of the potential target, the operations themselves, the integration, the decision to keep subsidiaries or departments which were not at the beginning in the core business of the group. Remember what I said on baby food, what I said on pasta. And we studied after that the payments, the means of payments used, and you understood that we were in a very positive, I would say, environment, a bullish environment with capacity to pay in shares, which allow to accelerate the acquisition process. Then in the last hour, we went through the 1973-1979 period of time, which is another step, and a period of crisis with the restructuration of the flat glass, the use of the multiple option facilities, which were negotiated not to deal with the crisis, but to deal with acquisitions, to finance acquisitions. And then we had a look to a few data which explain, the success of the restructuration. And we had discussion on how could a PE be used for. It's a kind of signal, as we said. What also after that was the dilemma in terms of strategy. What to do when you are very more diversified than before, with a food and packaging activity on one side and operations on the other side, the original and traditional operations in the flat glass industry. No connection and no correlation. You can say it's perfect diversification, but at the same time, it's very difficult to grow quickly, to get on the larger market, a position of leader, or number 2, or even number 3 for large market, with kind of core business. So it was clearly decided And this is always very difficult. It's your history, you know. It was decided to sell or resell the flat gas activities. So we were at that point, you know, we are at the beginning of 1980, and we have been through all these elements of the preceding acquisition and merger. That's what we have done during that period of time. So now what I'm going to do today, I want to do perhaps three kind of presentation, deal with three topics. The first one is what's happened when you sell. What's happened when you sell, and this is, and I choose also that case because I know it very well, as you know, but because it was a great example. We had, of course, that Saint-Gobain operation, which was the first one in Europe. And we had also another operation, which was the projects to resell the flat glass, which is not the first one in Europe, but the circumstances were such that it became also on another set of questions. The first example, it means it is on relation with the regulators, the problem of concentration, the problem of cartels, you know, that kind of thing. Okay, so this is the second part. After that, I have another topic, which is on the next years of operations of that group. And it means here, it is the years, I would go quicker on that part, from 1983 to 1995. Why 1983? Because now, 1983, the group is a pure player, or nearly a pure player, if you accept that the packaging is nearly completely integrated into the food industry. It's a pure player in the food industry. In 1995, because after nearly 30 years, you get a new CEO and you get a new strategy. I will explain. And after that, we have later, you know, the years before, between 1995 up to now. So this is the second topic. The third topic here, is on the another case you find. You'll find on your computer. It will be sent by tram, which is the Perrier case, and the Perrier case allows to go further into the concentration policies, cartel management, you know, and tax issues which are behind. And you find now in the negotiation, in a more modern, I would say, presentation. And this is very central for every economy in the world. The tax issue for multinational, where do you have to pay the taxes? How can they use tax paradise? What about the negotiations? What about the OECD? And now more than 120 countries which agreed on a specific new set of rules. So the beginning is here in that case, and the end, at least the last step, you know, available and negotiated and signed by a large majority of the countries in the world, is with the last negotiation around the OECD. So this is clearly the second step. And to go into the details, I will use another case, you know, and this other case I will use is called Perrier, which is probably the best example of what can do a regulator, a large regulator. So that's what I want to go through today. To try to explain all that, I will use also a set of slides. There are 70 slides, which are called M&A, growth, and so on. You also received. I will use in the first step about 16 of them, 15 first slide, keeping for another course later the other slides. That's what I want to do, and I hope to be able to do that today. So remember, we are here. This was the first slide, and I will explain you the next step. After this summary, I will explain you the next steps, and we were somewhere around here. Yeah, we were here, 1980, 1985. So the crisis is over. You know, the crisis of the world is changing, and 1980. If you compare to the situation right now, it's a complete change, which is just the other way. The world, at least for the large countries, large and developed countries at the time, up to 1980 was governed by economists belonging to the Keynesian school. It means they thought that public budget, large public budget and expenses were very useful and were in fact the engine of the economy. But the private investment will follow the public investment. This is the question of the multiplier, the Keynesian multiplier you heard in your economic courses, of course. In 1990, a new policy is coming progressively. The preceding one, the Keynesian policy, started with the Second World War, and particularly in peacetime in 1945. So 1945, 1980, to summarize quickly, it's Keynesian policy, extension of public expenses, and the analysis of growth accelerator based on the Keynesian multiplier. And now, 1980, we start with a new policy. The new policy is mainly based on the economic publications, articles of what we call the Chicago School, which are not based anymore on public investment, but we believe that monetary policy, low inflation, are the basic condition to have growth rate, increasing growth rate, and increasing GDP in the economies. If you come back to political history, in England, it is the election of Mrs. Thatcher as a prime minister, and in the US, the election of President Reagan. So here we are. The question, if you go up to now, is: are we in a period of the kind of third period, with a movement, a balance, coming back to some kind of equilibrium between these two economic theories, a group of theories, with again the increase in public expenses, budget expenses, but also with something completely new, which is the expansion of the monetary basis. And it started, of course, with the Lehman Brothers crisis in 2008. It was accelerated by the 2011-2012 sovereign bonds crisis, and now by the pandemic crisis. So this is for the environment. And when you deal with any kind of financial question, and particularly M&A, you have to understand where you are. What is the trend in the economic environment, in the theories, policies accepted by the largest countries. So we are in 1980, and BSN Dannen has decided to sell or to resell the sets they get in the flat glass industry. Here we are. Okay. Here we are, and you will see a few slides below. The first one be slide number 25. You should see slide number 25. We'll analyze the contracts, the consequences of the deal, how you do it in terms of debt. What about the debt? What about the business afterwards? 29 will be the evolution of the stock price, share price, price earning, net earning per share, and the beginning of a new policy, a new strategy. So I will use mainly 29, 28, 27, 26, and 25 here, and I was there to present all these slides. So number one, and you find a good summary of what was decided and what happened here with number 25. Reminder that flat glass net earnings were negative and sometimes very negative during the last years. And even if you see here the last data, but you have you had the slide and with the preceding ones, you get minus 158, minus 62. The negative value is reduced year after year, but it becomes positive only in 1981. Remember, the last positive year was 1973. So crisis, that kind of crisis is always very long. If you compare to the 2000 crisis, or probably with what will happen in some economic sector which are really hurt by a pandemic, like the airlines, for example, the 5, 6, 7 years period of time to recover completely is generally observed. So anyway, what's happened? What was the decision in 1980? We are nearly at the equilibrium. It was decided to find a buyer. And the perspectives were quite positive, with the return of the growth in the economies, the new policy based not anymore on the multiplier, Keynesian multiplier, but on the fight against inflation and the management of a monetary basis. So BSN Dannen decided to sell. What can you do when you want to sell on a market which is a regional market? And there is a leader, Saint-Gobain Pont-à-Mousson, but you're trying to buy Saint-Gobain, and probably Saint-Gobain cannot buy your assets because they are already number one, they are a leader, and probably they would get a clear no from the regulators, national and European. So the second possibility, easy possibility, was to get in touch, to try to negotiate with number 2, which is about the same size, which is Pilkington, the British group, family-owned, as I said. Pilkington was not to be sold, but they could be interested in enlarging their market shares and become number 2 closer to the number 1 in order to compete. So a negotiation took place between BSN Dannen and Pilkington management, shareholders, and they find very quickly the conditions, agreed very quickly on the conditions of an agreement, and they signed the contract. So they agreed on the sale of BS and Danone sets in the flat glass industry. It's a partial sale to Pilkington. So it's a negotiated deal, and Pilkington will buy the set part in flat glass is set part of BS and Danone. We agreed on the price, and it was decided it will be paid in cash, which is good news for BS and Danone. It was good news because several reasons. First, they bought 100% of the flat glass, not part of it, 100%. Second, it could be not done immediately. Pilkington had the cash, it signed. Some details to go through, but it would take a few weeks or 2 or 3 months, and we will get the cash. And that means also we get cash, which is the easiest situation to try to apply a new strategy and make new acquisitions in an environment which is not as bullish as it was in 1971 or 72 or 73, even if it is not as bearish than in 75 or 76. So that was a good negotiation, great deal. That's exactly what BS and Danone needed. And for Pilkington, it was probably the only opportunity to increase their market share in Europe quickly, also without having to buy a different kind of firms and to integrate them. But what's happened? Immediately, the department dealing with concentrations and cartels in Brussels, it was a common market at the time, it was not the European Union, which was created in the 90s, said no, this is not possible. We don't agree on that. You cannot do it. It's not because you signed an agreement, then you can go further. Okay, so we forbid this deal and this acquisition by Pilkington of the flat glass assets of BS and Danone. Okay, so that was the situation. I will come back on the European Union later in this session to explain you how it works. But that means, in front of that deal, there was the agreement of the national regulators in England and in France. But there was a clear no from the regional regulator of the EU, the department, which will be department number 5 in Europe, dealing with cartels and concentrations. This is where we are. So when they say no, there is no way to go further. The only things you can do, and you will see that later in the example I'll show you, is first to try to negotiate. You are Pilkington and BS and Danone, you can go to Brussels and try to argue, or you try to obtain a kind of compromise. This is the first one. And the second one, which is not used in the 90s, but will be used in the 90s, is to ask the European courts to open this file and to say if they agree or not with the position of the department number 5. So you have 2 possibilities, you have 2 possibilities to try to modify the decision. In fact, here, they didn't use them. They didn't use them. And they just negotiated with Brussels the possibility to keep this agreement on a part of the sets of BSN Danone in the flat glass. And after discussion, the Department number 5 accepted by Pilkington and BSN Danone signed a new agreement for a smaller part of the assets, about 1/3. And this is what you see on that slide. Pilkington was allowed to acquire 1/3, about 1/3 of the assets of BSN Danone in the flat glass, about 1/3. Okay, it's about 1/3. And this 1/3, you know, which was identified, was one of the 3 main holding companies created by BSN Danone in the flat glass industry, which is the German one, which is called Flashglas. And this is what you see here. So first the EU said no, and there was a short negotiation to try to keep the agreement, but on a smaller basis, about 1/3 of the original position. Okay, about 1/3. And it was agreed at the end by both players, Pilkington, BSN Danone, and the European Union. But that means when you have that kind of situation, you know, you have sold 1/3 of your assets in an industry, but you want to leave the industry, and there is no other large player in the flat glass industry in Europe. You have to find other solutions. And it took time. You know, 1 year after, BSN Danone found another potential buyer, which is a Japanese group. You probably know that group. Still a large group today, a Japanese group called Asahi. And they signed a contract with Asahi. And Asahi bought the asset in the flat glass industry of BSN Danone in Belgium, Netherlands, Luxembourg. It is Glavabel, the second holding. And at that time, they had sold about 2/3, and there is 1/3 left. You know, there is 1/3 left, and the last third, you know, was Boussois, the original firm in the flat glass industry, which is French-based, and they had to find another player. As they didn't want to buy more, Pilkington could not buy more because of the European regulation and the position of the Department number 5. They had to find another player, which could be only a player from outside Europe. And they found, you know, a producer, a flat glass producer in the US called PPG. PPG is still existing today. And PPG bought the third part, the third holding company, which is Boussois. So what does it mean? It means it took nearly 3 years to manage this process, step by step, you know, selling each time about 1/3. First to the original potential buyer, Pilkington, but after that to groups coming from outside Europe. It means, and this was the goal of the European Union structure in Brussels. They brought more competition. So the conclusion is that 2 new competitors were brought to the market, large competitors are not medium-sized firms, you know. But one is Japanese, the second is American. So this is a good example of a goal, the application of a goal of the European Union, which is mainly to bring more competition in each economic sector, particularly in those dominated by 1, 2, or 3 players. And they reached their goal. The Department reached its goal, which was to have now, instead of only 3, they had 4 with Pilkington, Saint-Gobain, Asahi, and PPG. Well, if you have a look to the position of companies, Pilkington wanted to be bigger, and they could not become bigger. They could not buy the Glaverbell and Boussois. So they are not very happy with the decision. Of course, BS and Danone is not very happy also because they lost time. It took them 3 years to sign the 3 deals. It was complex. And of course, they could not really develop their new strategy before the end of this period. Instead of developing a new strategy in 1980, in fact, it was developed in 1983. That's what it means. And you will see that also the market, the stock market, considered that BS and Danone was still a flat glass producer up to 1983. It means a few months after the end of the process of the negotiation with the 3 companies with Brussels authority. And this is clearly demonstrated by one of the next slides I will show you with the evolution change in the price earning ratio. So this is what we find, this is what we have right now here, it is very, very clear. Now, what does it mean? You should remember that there is only cash, there is no payment in shares, okay? There's only cash in that permission. And if you come back to this table I showed you at least twice, instead of having 88% of debt equity ratio, and remember that we went up to 140%, by the middle of the 70s, we are back to 39%. 39% is a bit too high. They prefer to have between 25 and 30, but with some small more adjustments, in the asset portfolio, they will come back very quickly to something between 25 and 30%. So this is also the opportunity not only to concentrate the business on one economic sector, but also to solve, in 3 years with these 3 sales, the problem of debt equity ratio per bet, and also to reobtain, to re-establish their debt equity and the possibility to use, the new multiple option facilities to finance acquisitions. So this is the second slide. And you will see that each time there is a specific circumstance, either a crisis or large acquisitions, of course, there is an increase in the debt equity ratio. But after that, the priority of the CFO and financial managers is to come back to 25 to 30% debt equity ratio, which gave you flexibility, debt capacity, facilitate the payment of the next acquisitions. Here, you should also understand how it is paid. And this is very classical in acquisitions. The total payment is on the right side, the right column. Total of both payments is 2,333 and 39 millions of what was fractions in time. And they are split between the 3 agreements. The largest one is with Flash Glass. On Flash Glass with Pilkington, this is the first one. The 2 others with the Japanese and the US-based group are small deals. Okay, but when you every reduction, you receive cash. In fact, there's two ways to receive cash. The first one, you can have a payment, transfer you. This is what you find in first column, for example, for Flashgrass 1030. But you can also transfer debt. Modify the balance sheet at the last negotiation. You put more debt on the balance sheet of the subsidiary, and you transfer firms with more debt than before the negotiations. So you can be paid, in fact, by a payment in cash, but also a reduction of your own debt, which is at the end the same. It's an improvement in your cash position. And you see that it's not. It's quite large. There are 1,437 of the cash transfer, and you have debt reduction for 902, which means it's what the second one is about 60% of the first one. So this is something you have to be very careful when you study a case. Now, this is where we are. So what does it mean in terms of core business, in terms of portfolio activity and operations? The group is not anymore in the flat gas, which were originally the main the kind of operations, main activity. It's 82% in the food industry, 18% in the packaging, and packaging is a kind of appendix, as we said before, of the food industry. Okay, and the last one is for zero. Okay, so a group core business is more simple than it was. There is correlation between the different activities. Very often the customers are the same. It's very oriented towards customers as supermarkets, hypermarkets, that kind of customer. Even if they still keep contracts with producers, it means they still keep B2B activity. For example, in the beer industry, now they, for customers, all the retailers, all the cafe, hypermarkets, supermarkets, but also they keep, as customer, the brewery, the producer of beers, because producer of they buy bottles and they find only two large producers in Europe in the bottle industry, so three large producers, Pilkington, BSN Danone, and Saint-Gobain. But they are mainly, the dominant is B2B, B2C, and not B2B anymore. So it has been simplified, it's more concentrated, and that means they will have to restructure balance sheet. It's more short term. It's less with long-term debt. It's also modification we need on the human resource management, increase the quality, number of the marketing teams, and reduce the number of engineers. Okay, so it's a complete modification. It's a complete change in culture, human resource management, financial and costs policy. Next slide here, show you a few more points. And we already said a few about that kind of presentation. What you see here is that the net profit or net earning per share is increasing, first slowly, and then there's a kind of acceleration. And if you compare 1979, 1983, it's really the double. Okay. In the meantime, you find the share price moving up, you know, from 835 to 2,689, which means it has been multiplied by more than 3. So the share price is going up quicker than the net earning per share. That means we transfer that in terms of calculation of the price earning. The group moved on the stock market from PE at a level of 7, 8, 8.5, something like that, to suddenly in 1983 at a level of 13.2. And you can say a few words on that, but it's very important to understand that financial theory is useful sometimes. You know. First, it's a clear signal. It means the market has understood that the dominant policy, the portfolio of activity of a group is not anymore in the flat glass, but is now in the food industry, and they adjust the price earning to the average price earning of the competitors in the food industry. In a few months, there's an increase from 8.5 to 13.2. This is the change from the analysis of a market. You know. This is a signal given to the investors that we are now with a company which is food-based and not flat glass based. You can also argue in terms of efficiency theory, because it was clear that even in 92, after the second sale to Asahi, the group was really in the food industry and not anymore in terms of operations in the flat glass. Flat glass was marginal. This information was not taken into account by the market at that time, but it was taken into account 1 year after the end of the activity operations of the group in the flat glass. That means it's what we can call semi-weak or semi-strong efficiency. The news, the information is clearly taken into account in the price of a share and the interest earning, but not immediately. Not immediately. It's incorporated or taken into account one shot at the end of a process of a strategic movement. So this is what you can say. So at that stage, we have a new group, and the new group is in the food industry. And if you know that group, it's closer to what it is right now. However, we will understand in the next slide that this industry, food industry, had to be defined. It is a large industry with many segments, definition, in progressive definition, reduction of a definition will be useful to understand, to analyze the strategy and the financial policy. So you are here, 29, and we have finished with the third topic I wanted to go through today, you know, what's happened after the crisis, how to make a strategic decision, why, how to implement a strategic decision. Negotiation with Brussels, Department number 5, the introduction of outsider competitors coming from other continents of the European market, the position of the EU, we want to increase competition, the position also of many political leaders in Europe saying, this is stupid, we need to have European leaders, you know, first to protect the European market, and second to be able to invest in other parts of the world. And this discussion between those in favor of the leaders and those in favor of the competition is still on the table today. It is clear that with the pandemic, we moved slowly over the last 2 years from a clearly competition behavior to a more protected behavior, giving more importance to the fact that we get leaders on all the large economic segments of the activities. So this is where we are. Now, you get slide 31, which is another part of the policy. But before going there, I want to show you something else. And I hope I will find the slide. This is also always my problem. I hope I will find the slide. Where are they? Should be this one. Yeah. So I hope you see the slide. Here I am. Try to be. Okay, if you see my slide here, it's written on that slide, history, 1957 Roma Treaty, 1977 First Department in Brussels. Do you see the slide or not? Or do you sleep?
Yeah, I see.
You see it. Thanks. Thank you. So this is my second part of today. We introduced the common market institutions, what I call Brussels and Department number 5. But you have to understand what it means and also what was the evolution from the beginning, which is 1957 up to now, 2021. What does it mean for operations of acquisitions and merger also? Is it still so important than it was 20 or 30 years ago? Well, is it less? Or did other questions, which are not concentrations or cartel managements, are now taken into account and were not even known 40 years ago? So just a small summary of what's happened, because you have to understand the background. The first step is 1957. 1957, 6 countries in Europe signed the Roma Treaty. And this is the basis, the original treaty, which explains what's happened after in the European continent. The 6 countries were Germany, France, Italy, Belgium, the Netherlands, and Luxembourg. Means Western developed countries. Okay. And you know that today we are 27 in the Union, with progressive extension to other countries in central part, north part, and southern part. First Spain and Portugal, then Austria, Sweden, and Denmark. And after the end of the communist regime in the central and eastern part of Europe, progressively through years, countries in the central and eastern part of Europe, mainly Poland, Hungary, Czech Republic, Slovakia, Baltic countries, Estonia, Lithuania, Lithuania, but also later, in the last 15 years, Romania, Bulgaria, Slovenia, and Croatia issued from the former Yugoslavia. We have got also small countries, islands, Cyprus, and Malta. So we are 27. We are 27 now because, as you know, the British joined in 1973 and left definitely last year. This is what we call the Brexit. Okay. So this union was progressively extended in terms of number of countries and parts of the continent. Today, the only countries which are not member are either very specific countries like Switzerland, but Switzerland has signed many treaties, specific treaties on different issues with the EU, and they are clearly near members of the EU, but don't participate to the decision bodies. We have also very small countries like San Marino, Vaticano, Monaco, but this is not very important. And this is the clear last issues, countries belonging to the southeastern part of the continent, like Serbia, Macedonia, Montenegro, and the question in the back of Turkey and Ukraine. So that's what's happened, but it started in 1957. So you should remember that 1957 was only 12 years after the end of the Second World War. So the situation was not so easy between countries, and particularly between France, Belgium, and the Netherlands, and Germany. And also the situation in terms of financial and economic policy was not what it is now. I mean, the standard of living was much lower. And second, borders were very well controlled, and part of export and imports in the economy was quite limited. So Roma Treaty was signed in order to create a free economic market between these countries. The issue was to eliminate any kind of border payment control at the border between the countries, and to organize all these controls and payments on the external border. But there were also other specific elements, and we know very well that articles, what we call 80 to 85, are articles which said, which identified a few other rules, constraints, and goals, like the future economic union will fight monopolies, duopolies, oligopolies, dominant position, but also all the cartels. It means all the agreements between firms in order to limit the competition, with agreements, for example, on the prices, or agreements to make a segmentation of the market. The first firm having part of the market, and the second one another part of the market. So it was a kind of free trade oriented agreement, but all what we have to take into account in M&A is nearly written in a simplified way in this treaty. And what happened is what happened very often with treaties. Prime ministers or presidents sign the treaty, and they are interested mainly at the time by few specific goals which are taken into account in the treaty, like to eliminate the borders for individuals and for products. But they were not really interested by this problem of monopolies, dominant position, cartels, and so on. And it is only 20 years after, in 1977, that the Common Market Authority in Brussels, which was created at the time, decided to apply these articles signed 20 years before. And they created the first department with a mission, which was to implement the measures which are written, presented into the treaty. The problem when you apply something new like that, and is that you need some kind of rules, principle, experience, not only a few words like we fight against cartels and dominant position. Okay, and there was in the world only two experiences. Of course, the first one was the American one, the US one, which started in 1909. 1909 means a long time before First World War, and the second one being the German, which started in 1953, when Germany was restructured as a new state after the end of the Second World War. 1977, the team was, made, a few persons, about 10 persons there, coming mainly from Germany because the German had the experience. And their first attempt to limit, the consequences of an expected or planned operation was this Danone float glass operation 1990. So what means what I just explained a few minutes ago, was the first decision of the common market authorities in Brussels. And again, Danone is in the middle of an innovation. It was in the middle of an innovation with Saint-Gobain, convertible bonds, remember, a white knight. But it is now in the middle of another one, which is a decision of a Brussels authority, which says, no, you cannot sell all your flat glass to Pilkington. I validate for your decision for your agreement for 1/3, flash glass, but for the two other parts, you have to find other buyers. So they were not interested in what we call a leader or a European champion. They wanted to have more competition, lower prices for the customers, or for the customer, whatever they are. For B2B or B2C. So the principle was established. So progressively, and this is perhaps less important for you, several experiences allowed to improve the principles issued from the US and German experiences. It means they wrote progressively their rules with different cases in the 80s, and the new rules were definitely written and published in 1999. Text about 12 years. 1977 was the creation of the department. 1989 the rules were very clear. They decided to analyze mainly cross-border M&As of a sufficient size. There was a size in terms of level of sales, and progressively they move up the level of the size with inflation and the size of the operation. So all mergers or acquisitions operations have to be presented in front of this department number 5 if the sales taken into account in the operations are higher than a number which is redefined, re-examined, recalculated every year. But a new principle was introduced in 1991, and this is very important to understand when you deal with countries which are federal or confederal, like the European Union or like the US, for example, or even in national countries like Germany. It means that you have a principle which is probably stronger and stronger over the years, which is what we call the subsidiarity principle. subsidiarity principle, it was introduced really at the European level in 1991 in the Treaty of Maastricht, which is very central among the three European treaties, and which was validated by all the countries, all the members in 1992, either by parliament or by referendum. And this subsidiarity principle says that a topic, a question, whatever it is, should be analyzed and the decision made at the lower level possible. That means, you know, if it is a local problem, and if it can be solved by at the level of a city, it has to be solved there. If it is a bit larger, but not with implication of national players, it could be analyzed and decision made at the level of a region. If it is, for example, a French problem, for example, an acquisition and a merger between two French companies, this problem can be solved at the level of the French regulator. And it means that only the large and international problems, but these are the most important ones, have to be analyzed when the decision made at the European level by the office number one, department number one. So subsidiarity principle is very central, and it's one of the bases of the decentralization, progressive decentralization of decisions, you know, on many kind of topics, but particularly on acquisitions and merger. We have to study, you know, a few cases on that, which explain where we are right now. The first one is the Perrier case you received today, and I will go through with you, and which is of interest on this process of analysis of concentration, dominant position, and so on. But also it shows you how works hostile offers when they are complex, with a real battle on the market, you know, and within the target, more than one legal structure listed on the stock market. Then we had byproducts of all that, or evolution, and question left. Dominant position, you know, are more and more part of the topics the department number 5 is studying. I mean, of course, they are interested in cases like Clinton and Danone and some other classical one, I will show you. But they are very interested by dominant position without even acquisitions or merger. And they are more and more interested by these topics or questions. And it is clear that Microsoft, you know, is in the center of the questions: Microsoft position, dominant position, growth, kind of relation with customers or the distributor is one of the most important questions or topics studied during the last 10 years. But you can find others, okay, in that kind of industry. Cartels are also more and more of interest. Yeah. Cartels on prices, cartels to limit the competition with the segmentation of the market. We have several cases we've studied there in the telecommunication, in the cement industry, for example, also. So this is the second element. And the third one, which is still on the table, is alliances. And we will have cases later about you find two categories of alliances which are on the table. The first one is in the distribution sector. Some of the distribution sector, you find them in Vietnam, like Metro, for example, Big C, but you can have Walmart, Carrefour, Lidl, Aldi, some others. And all these players, they assign partial alliances together, for example, to negotiate with their providers. And the question is, do they have a dominant position with these alliances on part of the territory of the Union, or part of the countries, or not? How can you consider them? Very often they don't even have a joint venture, but they have signed agreement to negotiate together with providers, or also to have a kind of mutualization of transportation, or to limit their development in part of the countries. These alliances are somewhere between classical commercial contracts between independent firms and a group of firms, and they are under the examination of the authorities in Brussels. So dominant positions created by technological evolution, I would say, Microsoft is a good example. Cartels, agreement on prices mainly, telecommunication, British Telecom, Dutch Telecom, Telefonica, Orange in Europe. Cement industry, LafargeHolcim, for example, with Vicat or Heidelberg in Switzerland, and alliances in the distribution sector, but also these alliances you probably know in the airlines, just because Vietnam Airlines is a member of one of them, with some about 15 or 18 other companies like Air France KLM, which is SkyTeam Flying Blue, but we find at least two others, One World and Star Alliance. What are they? There's kind of network for limited commercial contract, or are they really a group of firms with some flexibility, but without a common legal structure, a common joint venture? So many topics which are up to date in joint ventures, mergers, acquisitions, are under study by the European Union in Brussels, but also by the concentration system analysis in the US. Anyway, there is a kind of new power equilibrium which started with the Maastricht Treaty in 1992. Maastricht Treaty is very important because at the same time this was a treaty which created the euro, in fact, but also redefined the rules and constraints in terms of concentration, dominant position, cartels, and so on. The EU institutions wanted to go further, and they proposed even a European constitution in 2005, but it was rejected in a large number of countries. And the subsidiarity became progressively a kind of point of equilibrium. You have to compare with the willingness of integration and enlargement of the Union. And to re-equilibrate the powers in terms of legal structure, the European Parliament counterbalance progressively the Commission powers, it means the Department number 5 powers. So we had an evolution. The public opinion is less in favor of global integration and centralization in Brussels of a decision. The states now ask for more subsidiarity. The Parliament, European Parliament, members of parliaments are elected by the population in the different countries, are more and more in favor of more subsidiarity. And on the other side, the center, the Commission in Brussels, means the legal body in charge of the European interest, is still, of course, in favor of the centralized management of concentration, dominant positions, cartels, alliances, and so on. And you have an equilibrium between these two positions and these two institutions, the Parliament and the Commission and Department number 5, for the questions we are analyzing here. Now we have a few cases we have to go through if we want to understand the evolution and also the introduction, which is something very central, of another kind of player. We will see in the Perrier case and in two other cases which are identified here, Wendel and KKR and Legrand. It is clear that we have a Commission, Department number 5, we have a Parliament, but progressively we have also another kind of player coming in, which are the courts. In some cases, it is the national court, in some other, the European courts, but the judges are more and more part of the decision in terms we accept or not the mergers, the acquisition, the joint venture. And they become progressively the final decision maker, at least in the most difficult cases. This is what I wanted to show you. This was done, in fact, between 1993 and 2006 with two cases. The one you showed before on the preceding slide, which is the Schneider-Legrand case, and this one, which is the Tetra Laval-Sidel case, and I will explain part of the element here. So now that means responsibilities are split between national power and the European power. Now, this is the second element which is here. And the first one, the courts are have been introduced into the process. This process of analysis of deals. One of the consequences, is that Brussels, this is point number 3 here, is more and more concerned by dominant position in cartels and less by concentrations. They are also interested by the dominant position, which have been developed in the Union by outsiders. I mean by foreign first. Microsoft is the best examples. At the beginning, it was dominant position, in the European Union, Saint-Gobain, Montemousson. But now it's more Microsoft, Apple, and so on. Okay. And what we start seeing which is not on that slide. In fact, for the last years, starting with the pandemic, but it started even with the sovereign bond crisis in 2011, 2012, the equilibrium between the position of competition and the position of leadership of some of the young players is more equilibrated than it was. The European institutions were 100% in favor of competition, more competition, whatever are the consequences. And the idea of sovereignty, leadership, is more and more taken into account at the same time by the national politician, public opinion, and by the European institution. It means the parliament progressively has gained more power, earned more power over the central institution, which is a commission with the department number 5. So it's a bit complicated for you and a bit far for you, but you shall understand that because you find the same evolution in the US and the regulations, on all these topics, and at the end on M&A, is driven by the position of the US and the European systems. So this is very central here. So this is what I wanted to show you. Now, at that point, we have presentation of the summary of 2 cases which are here on these slides before coming back to another case, which is of course Perrier. So we have 3 cases. Okay. You have a slide here on Schneider-Legrand case. It's at the beginning, it's very simple. Both companies are French-based companies. They are in the electricity sector. They are not producer of electricity, but they are producer of appliances. The kind of appliances you need, for electricity transportation, mainly for Schneider, but also appliances, what you use even in your house for Legrand. They were historically 2 independent companies, completely independent. They are not located in the same place. Schneider is based in Le Creusot, which is in the center east of France, between Lyon and Dijon, and Legrand is based in Limoges, which is the center of the country, west side. Okay. Both of them are family owned, but they are listed on the market with a much larger stake, owned by the families, by Schneider, Legrand having a very large float. And Schneider is much bigger than Legrand, about 3 times bigger. They are European leaders on their segment of the electricity market, both of them. So what was done? They decided, managers and shareholders, to meet. They negotiated, and they signed a friendly and successful takeover bid. It means it was completely friendly, no hostility, no battle, nothing like that. And it was supposed to be paid with a mixed offer, partly in shares and partly in cash. That means the shareholder was Legrand. Schneider was the bidder, buyer. Legrand was the target, in fact. Since Legrand shareholders will be paid partly in shares and partly in cash. And everyone agreed on that. We signed the contract. And as Schneider wanted 100% of the shares of Legrand, they launched a 100% takeover bid on Legrand shares, which was a friendly offer, in order to buy the shares of small investors of Legrand, small shareholders. They launched a takeover bid, but it was a friendly takeover bid backed by the boards and by the shareholders of both groups, very classical. Okay. So it was done, and the offer was successful. It means Schneider obtained something like 93% of the shares of Legrand. In that kind of situation, the French and the European rules are such that the buyer can launch a second offer, which is what we call a squeeze out. It means, and this is something interesting, it is a compulsory offer. It's a friendly but compulsory offer. I think if you are in the minority, the 7% left, you have no choice. At the end of the squeeze out, you are bought by the bidder. Of course, the bidder is supposed to meet a few conditions. The first one is before launching the squeeze out, having at least 90% of the shares of the target, which was the case, but also to offer a price which is at least equal to the price offered in the first attempt. And of course, they were successful and they get 100% of the shares. So at the end of the process, Schneider has bought 100% of the shares of Legrand. And the question there was the following one. You have two elements. The first one, on the management point of view, is what to do. When you are Schneider and you own 100% of the shares of Legrand, do you stay in that kind of situation, which is quite possible? You have a subsidiary which is owned at 100%, or do you decide to merge both companies? And this is a good case to understand that mergers happen after acquisitions. It was decided just to keep it like that because the business were different, the cultures were different, the locations were not the same. And Schneider decided to manage Legrand in the Schneider group, in some kind of independence of the management of Legrand, and keeping some characteristics, the name, the brands, the factories, the location, and so on. But in a few weeks after, and institutions and public bodies always take time. They heard that from Brussels that the European authorities made a negative decision. What does it mean? It means Brussels said no, we don't agree. You have signed this agreement, you Schneider, you have bought the shareholders of Legrand, but we don't accept this deal. Because we think that even if there is no merger, but the acquisition is such that you will manage your subsidiary on at 100%. And even if the products are different and the customers are quite different, there is a dominant position now in the electricity market in France and even in some other European countries like Belgium and Italy. So we said, no, you cannot go further. And you have to manage your positions in the financial market, because of course you have bought and paid the shares to minority shareholders of Legrand, but it's not possible to stay with that new structure and new organization. So what to do? You understand what's happened. You are a shareholder of Legrand. You have received an offer from Schneider. You said it's a good offer. I buy my shares. I get shares of Schneider and cash. And now I spend my cash enjoying my holidays. And 3 months after the holidays, Brussels is coming back saying it's not possible. It's clearly not possible to go back. Schneider has not the possibility to call back, the shareholder of Legrand to say, okay, Brussels doesn't agree with our deal. Give me back the cash and the shares, and I send you back your own shares. It's not possible. So that means that Schneider has to find a new strategy. And what they decided to do is to resell Legrand. So they didn't, cancel the operation, it was not possible, but they resold Legrand to investment funds. And it was bought, Legrand was bought by 2 investment funds, American one, which is KKR, and a French-based one, which is Wendel. And these 2 investment funds bought 100% of Legrand. It is clear that these investment funds generally don't keep their investment for a very long period of time, and a few years after, they decided that they have to disinvest. They manage properly, good performance, Legrand during these years. But in 2006, they decided to list again Legrand on the stock market, and they made an IPO with Legrand. And Legrand, as a new shareholder group, same management, but another shareholder group. And today, it is a growing firm, #1 in Europe on the segment of electricity they are developing. And they are still listed in Paris and Brussels and Frankfurt. But last point, Schneider said again, we were obliged to do that and to move to another strategy, of course, because we have been paid in cash by Wendel and KKR for the sale of Legrand. We have to invest in other companies, particularly in Asia and in the US. But at the same time, we don't agree with the decision from Brussels, and we think they are wrong. They are writing the law. They are not allowed to do that. And we ask to the European Court in Luxembourg to analyze this disagreement and to make a decision. And the European Court in Luxembourg analyzed, said the Brussels authorities, Department number 5, are wrong. There was no clear dominant position. It has not been demonstrated clearly. They are not on the same products. Schneider products are mainly sold to other industry producers, and KK and Legrand products are sold partly also to these business producer, but also to families, individuals, final consumer. So this is not demonstrated. So we decided to cancel the decision of the European Union. So that means, you know, there was a decision of Brussels. Schneider decided to resell, sold to investment funds, get the cash and reinvested the cash in other acquisition operations in different countries. But they decided, just to make things clear, and because perhaps the same case can happen in the future, to ask the judges, European judges, what they think about the decision of the Brussels Authority. And they won. They obtained the cancellation, but it was too late to come back to the deal, on the deal. But you know, at least the rules were clear and will be applied later. That means you have an equilibrium now between different institutions. The central institution in Brussels, what we call the Commission, which is Department number 5, the Parliament, the judges, and we have more equilibrated decision. We had the same situation 1 year after. And this is why it's interesting to have the same, or nearly the same situation, because it means, you know, when decision is made the same way, with the same principle, based on the same principle twice, it's like a law. It's strong. So the case was very different. It was a case of an acquisition made by a Swedish firm called Tetra Laval on a French firm called Sidel, and they are in packaging industry. What you find in Europe, for example, in many other countries, from packaging of milk, for example, or orange juice and so on, is made by Tetra Laval. It is very specific and innovative technology. And Sidel is producing the equipment to design and produce the bottles, plastic bottles you use particularly for bottles of water, for example. And they are number 1 in the world for that. So that means that Tetra Laval management wanted to enlarge their ability to produce different categories of packaging, particularly for food and beverages. And it happened and was done like the preceding case. There was a friendly discussion. An agreement was prepared, signed, you know, and same situation. It was split partly in shares, partly in cash. It was a takeover bid, a friendly takeover bid of Tetra Laval on Sidel shareholders and shareholders. We obtained more than the 90% of the shares necessary to launch a final process, which is what we call a squeeze out, a compulsory operation. It means 100% of the shareholders of Tetra Laval were bought, you know, were bought by the excuse me, 100% of the shareholders of Sidel were bought by Tetra Laval. So Tetra Laval owns 100% of Sidel. And as it was done in the preceding case, they decided not to merge, but to keep and to manage Sidel with 100% ownership. And again, same kind of reasons, same kind of analysis. they get a decision, negative decision from the Brussels authority, from the Department of Fire, saying, you have a too large now market share in Europe and particularly in France in the packaging industry for food and beverages. And of course, the argument was they are very different, not the same kind of packaging. We are not at the same level. Tetron Laval is producing the packaging, and Sidal is producing the equipment, the factories which are used, which are invested in to produce the plastic. Ask the judges what they thought about that. And the judges, in front of the same judges, in front of the same situation, were clearly homogeneous with their first judgment, and said there is no reason, to cancel this operation. There's enough competition. They are not exactly on the same segment. We think this is, in total, very positive for the European industry, for integration, and also for the consumer, but because this will allow more productivity and lower costs of production. And it was decided by Tetron Laval to keep Sidal. This is a difference with the preceding case, because it takes about nearly 2 years to have a judgment of the court in Luxembourg. Schneider thought it was too long. That's the reason why they sold Legrand. And here Tetron Laval said, no, we want to integrate. It's part of our project, our strategy. We want to integrate this company. So we are waiting for the judgment. They won at the level of the court. And we decided, to keep Sidal and to integrate Sidal in the perimeter of the group with 100% ownership, but with an independent legal body. So you understand at the end that if you start in 1957 and you see what the situation is since 2003, 4, 5, it's completely different. More equilibrium between the different institutions, national institution, European institution, among the European institution, equilibrium between the Parliament, the Commission, and the courts in Luxembourg. You understand also that priorities are not exactly the same. It's less focused on concentration and more focused on other elements, equilibrium between the position of leaders and competition and lower cost and lower prices for the final consumer. The decisions are more and more decision on cartels and decision also on alliances than decision on classical concentration. That's how it is moving. But anyway, it's a very important framework you have to take into account on your decision of merger and acquisition, because you need, if it is a large one or it's international, it means with operations in at least 2 countries, you need the agreement of Brussels authorities. This is what I wanted to show you here. So I've got the last case, which is Perrier case. The Perrier case integrates also other dimension, much more complex than only this one. So it's a kind of very good summary case of different questions. I will not deal with that case right now, but after these two first steps, what's happened between 1980 and 1983, how this company, BSN Danone, became a pure player in the food industry, starting from flat gas producer, which diversifying the activity into the food sector, went through crisis and so on. And these decisions, structure, regulation from different authorities, and partly from the European authorities, with the evolution of what are the European authorities and their priorities. This is what I wanted to show you here. I have got a third part I want to go through today, which is on a kind of summary of elements and extension of elements on M&A. And for that, I will use another set of slides you received. They are somewhere here. They are called mergers and acquisition, external growth and restructuring of firms. It's 70 slides. It's really a course. It means you can teach mergers and acquisition nearly without example, but it is, I think, quite boring. So I chose to use many example in cases, but sometime to come back to this presentation. And I will use here the 16 first slide to try to summarize, perhaps to reformulate several elements and principles before going further into the evolution of the group after 1983, which is, you will see, a kind of bullish acquisition policy. And to deal with this case on Perrier, which is a more complex case than the preceding ones. So I am here with mergers and acquisition slides, external growth and restructuring of firms. It's time for a short break, as usual, something like 7 minutes. Before moving to these slides at the beginning of the second part of this course number 3 today. So let's have a break. I hope you see my slides. If you don't see my slides, mergers and acquisition, external growth and restructuring of firms, just say you don't slide them. I will try to improve the situation. But you know, it's supposed to be, they are supposed to be there on your screen. Is that okay? You see my slides?
I still see the European concentration and cartel.
Thank you. So I have to do something. To do something more. And now?
Yes,
Yeah, now I
see
see.
Mergers and acquisition, external growth.
Yes.
Great. Okay, so we can have a break, a few minutes, and we start with these slides. Okay, so I think we have a break. We had a break. We can start again. 7 minutes break is enough. Yeah. What I want to do with you now is what I said before the break. Is to try to go through a part of the 70 slides you received. I will start at slides 16 or 17. It's more kind of presentation of many topics you went through. So you will have a kind of summary, you have definition, and a few other points will be also introduced. We'll use the next slide, it means from 17 to 70, from 17 to 70 later in another part of the course. So you understand that the topic is very clear here. We don't say M&A, we say external growth. It means in external growth, we have, of course, mergers, we have a call acquisition, we have acquisition followed by merger, total merger, partial merger, but also there's investment, joint ventures, spin-offs, buyouts. This will be mentioned in the slide. It's much larger, in fact. That's only merger and acquisition, which is a very often used presentation, but too limited and wrong presentation. So let's move to the next slide. We are here. I should be able to move. What's happened here? But no. Oh, I'm back here. Sorry, there's a problem. I don't know why. Yeah. So I hope we see the slides. If you don't see the slide, I hope you see the slide number 2. I don't know why the slides moved. Slide number 2 is on market for corporate control. This is the title. So I hope you see the slide. If you don't see the slide, just say you don't see the slide. We'll try to come back to the sharing system.
We see it now. We see it now, Professor.
You see it? Fine, thank you. So, my ideas, the idea I introduced because just before I had a technical problem, is that M&A is part of a broad market for corporate control. And what we are dealing with is more corporate control than technically only mergers or acquisitions or acquisition followed by merger. It's not only acquisition of company by others, but includes spin-offs. And we have more and more spin-off. I will show you examples later. Okay. Divestiture. That's what we saw with BSN Danone here. The increase of a position, the new acquisition in the food industry were mainly explained by a charter strategy. Of course, it was a decision prepared and made at the upper level of a company, but also because it was possible to resell the flat glass and to resell in very good conditions. Restructuring of capital structure, very often also part of corporate control market. We see that with BSN Danone in other operations. Buyouts and buyout of public companies by group of private investors. The ordinary mergers involve combination of two established firms, firm A, I buy firm B, and after that I merge firm A and firm B. But this is only a very limited part and the easiest part of the topic of M&A. That's the reason why it's better to say market to corporate control than anything else. Oh, so if we come back to mergers and acquisitions, remember what we have said. We said we have two main kinds of operations, which are generally acquisitions followed by merger. Be very careful. A horizontal one between two firms in the same line of business. So remember what we have done. We have been through horizontal mergers between companies in the flat glass industry. The new strategy after the failure of the deal of the offer on Saint-Gobain was for BSN to develop horizontal strategy acquisitions and then partial mergers with creation of free holdings. It means they bought firms in the same economic sector in different European countries, but also for the first time, one firm in Brazil. Okay. And we give you here several very good examples in different industry. Total Fina, for example, and ELF in the petroleum industry. Total Fina was a Belgian group. ELF, state-owned French group. Total, an independent company. Total is one of the major players today, and they grew mainly by acquisition in the last 20 years. Now they are moving again for another set of acquisitions because they tried to diversify their activities out of the petroleum industry, mainly in renewable, solar, wind-based industry. Okay. You find an example of an international element, Alcatel and Lucent. They are a competitor, UI, the Chinese group today. You find also in the cement industry, Holcim, which is number 2 in the world, and this is Swiss-based group, and they bought Lafarge, French number 1. So we can find many examples of a horizontal merger, which increase the market share, or even if it didn't increase on each market when they are the market share, they increase the market share globally on the world scene or on the continental scene. That's very classic. You have a vertical merger, and vertical merger, we had this example of BSN and beer producer, BSN and Evian in water supply, for example. But you can find many vertical mergers. One of the largest one is Disney and ABC television network in the US. And there is one kind of operation we didn't went through. It is the conglomerate merger. Here you have an example which is presented, which is Vivendi and Seagram. Vivendi, it's a French-based company which is mainly in the media. They own television network, for example. They have 20% in telecom in Italy. They also have a stake into other firms like the newspapers, and they bought, they bought Seagram. Seagram is a producer, Canadian-based producer of alcoholic beverages. Okay, it's nothing to do with the media, with the newspapers, with the TV, with the telecom. I can say it's good because it's diversification, yeah. But clearly it cannot be merged, for example, of one of the company owned by Vivendi. So what's happened generally in that kind of case is that progressively these companies like Vivendi became a company with a head, which is with the headquarters, which is a holding company. It means a company without any kind of industrial or commercial operations, but only with financial management operation, and they manage, in fact, a portfolio of stakes into different firms. The well-known case, which is studied in many textbooks, is the case of GE, General Electric, which is not as successful as it was 10 years ago, but was the number one for years, number one market value in the American Stock Exchange. And GE is a holding company. And they started, with subsidiaries, in fact, in firms producing and selling electrical products in the electricity sector. Competitive, they are competitors from Schneider, they were competitors from Schneider and from Legrand. Okay, but they had also, they owned the bank. They were in the financial business. They were also in other economic sector, for example, in real estate. And they were also in the energy sector, producing, equipment of energy production using different kind of sources. So they went progressively into different economic sectors. They bought, managed, and resold. It's acquisition, no merger, and few years or 10 years after, or 20 years after, sometimes disinvestment. So it's not a classical firm at the end. It's somewhere between the management of the firm, industrial and commercial firm, and of a diversified investment portfolio. Conglomerate were really up to date with very good performance. It's something which is not really explained. In the 70s and 80s of the last century, and today we find less and less conglomerate structure. Generally, when you have a conglomerate, after a few years, you get a spin-off. It means each firm, or at least some group of firms in specific business, have their own life and their own listing on the market, and we see through a few spin-offs like that. Behind you always find two presentations. What do we say in finance? We say main idea is diversification. It means if you have in a firm or in a group of firms in unrelated business, no correlation between the businesses. That means it's less risky. It's one way to manage risk. And if you have a look to the strategic textbook, they just say the contrary. They say you have to be concentrated on one economic sector. You cannot be a good management team at the same time in the food industry, in real estate, and in the electric business. That's not possible. It requires different kind of expertise, The culture is not the same. Some of the firms are run by marketing people, some others are run by engineers, some others are run by financial teams. It's completely different. So you have to be concentrated on your business. You need, and markets like pure player, not diversified player. And it seems if you have a look at what's happened even on the stock market today, that the market opinion has completely changed. 40 years ago, 45 or 50 years ago, they preferred, was a premium for diversified company conglomerates, and now for pure player, which explains the larger number on spin-off we had in the last few years, and I will come back on that point. Rational merger is clearly to create value for shareholders. You can argue that it is to increase the market share, to become the leader, because when you are a leader, you have more influence on the prices, and if there's some inflation, you can increase easily the prices, and that kind of argument you can have. There's also suppose that all other stakeholders will be better off if a merger operation is carrying through. So, of course, you have to create value for our shareholders. But successful operation is an operation which is good also for staff, which is good for customers, which is good for providers, for the local authorities, where the firm is located, because they are interested in the jobs, of course, and the taxes. So it's much more difficult than the only rationale, which is very explained in the textbook, to create value for. You have to create value for shareholders, it's clear. But it's more complex than that. You have the shareholders and all the other stakeholders. And in many cases, it's difficult to satisfy all of them. Okay. All the other motives than this one, but they are sufficiently large, are secondary. This is generally possible if you have two elements. First, growth. When you have growth on your markets, it's much easier to satisfy anyone. But also you need synergy gains at the time of an acquisition followed by a merger. Synergies are very central. And this couple, market growth, synergies, explain generally the success. After that is a question of good management or bad management. If you go into the detail, you can find what we can call efficiency gains or motives for mergers. I have a list here. You can read it by yourself, but some of them are very important in some examples, some cases. For example, economies of scale. Economies of scale are very important for those activities and industries with large, important fixed costs. We went through a beer example in the two preceding sessions, and it is clear that beer industry, brewery, and you have many breweries in Vietnam, okay? If you have a look to the costs of breweries, you find a large percentage of fixed costs. And generally, this is very sensitive to the quantity produced. It means when you are able, to reduce the number of factories of brewery, for example, from 6 to 4, you make economies of scale. It means your fixed costs are globally decreasing, even if your variable costs are not, and your profits are also increasing. Sometimes you get also increased market share. That's what I said. When you become, you were number 3, and you merge with number 4, and now you are as big as number 1. You have an impact on prices. You manage the prices with number 1 and number 2, and of course you increase your margin. Very often also. You improve productivity through cost cutting, particularly in information system, HR, which is also very central in cost cutting operations. Accounting, mainly that kind of function. It's much easier to manage the funds, and if you need a positive cash position, you don't need generally when you have bigger, a cash position which make your treasury safe, which is at the addition of position of the firms which have been merged. You need less, so. That means you have a surplus of funds to do something else. Your cash management is not as costly as it was. So you find some other point you can go through by yourself, perhaps less important than the first one. And after motives for merger, let's have a look to few strategic regions, and probably the most important for bankers is number 3. And number 3 is to be too big to fail. Too big to fail. Okay. So we learned a lot from the preceding crisis, 3 last crises. Lehman Brothers, 2007, 2009, the sovereign crisis, 2011, 2012, and of course the pandemic crisis. Perhaps we learn more from the crisis. What we know is that when you have a very large bank and you are under difficulty or insurance company, central banks, governments are nearly obliged to bring you necessary cash to survive. Because if you are declared bankrupt, you can after that kind of financial catastrophe in the country and perhaps in the world. Probably if you have a look at what's happened in the past, the decision of the US government and the central bank there on Lehman Brothers was not the right one. They had better, to support them and to bring them necessary cash to survive. And after a few days, they understood the mistake. And when at the time, largest insurance company in the world, AIG, was bankrupt because some operations on derivatives, mainly on the London markets, it was decided to refinance AIG with after that some constraint, they had to split in 2 parts and so on. But they were too big to fail. And we saw that in different countries, like Britain, for example. it wasn't supposed to be a free economy with large banks. British are supposed to be good in finance and banking industry. But at the time, of this crisis, if HSBC survived, number two failed and was bankrupt, in fact. Number two was Royal Bank of Scotland, RBS. And the government invested a large amount of cash, buying 98% of the shares. It was not nationalized, was not 100%, but close to 100%. This bank was too big to fail. The risk to have a complete bankrupt of the financial system, at least in England, perhaps in other countries, was so great. But even in a liberal country, it was decided to bring. It was decided that the government will bring the necessary cash. So too big to fail could be a strategic reason. If we had a look to the last ranking, there's a ranking published every 6 months of kind of financial institution, which are very risky for the system as a whole, financial system as a whole. We have one of them in France, which is number 4 in the world, I think, which is BNP Paribas. They have a branch in Vietnam, because now they are very big, very diversified. They are on different continents. They are leading in several countries in Europe. And if they failed, if they were bankrupt, probably the consequences would be impossible to forecast. So it's really better, to have a kind of survival plan for a kind of company. But it's also one way to manage the bank, because when everyone consider that you have too big to fail, you know that in case of difficulties, you will obtain easily new funds by the central bank or by the government. This is a list of what we call value drivers. And this brings to the calculation of synergies. And we have opportunity later in different cases to calculate synergies. And we have a distinction to make between synergies. We have those which are negative and positive. Sometimes you merge two firms and you have negative consequences. And generally negative consequences are management explained. It means you in a country, you mix two teams coming from two different firms, merged, and it doesn't work, just because the culture, the background, the organizational structure, the behavior, the goals, the values are different. So you have to do very, very careful to this point. Generally, it is undervalued. It's difficult to calculate because it's not in the income statement, it's not in the balance sheet. But we have good examples at the same time in the banking system. Or I know one of them, in the distribution system. It was so negative that the synergies, global total synergies, were negative for 10 years before coming back to equilibrium and later being positive. So that's management, culture, value, organizational structure. On the other side, you have a classical synergies. Easier to calculate because you can find numbers, even if the numbers are very often not completely comparable. And they are explaining positive synergies. And positive synergies are coming from two origins. The first one is cost saving, and you have a list of cost saving here. Reduction in labor costs, reduction in of cost, human cost, including costs related to marketing and distribution. Better recruitment strategies, better HR management, reduction in after-sales saving costs, better and efficient IT services, savings in purchasing costs, particularly when you are on international markets. And generally, we think synergies are reduction, cost savings, but they are not only cost saving, they are also increasing revenues. I had to manage the situation. We bought a company with Danone in Britain, and we were exporting products with a distributor. We had to pay the distributor to sell our products, and we bought a company. And we decided immediately to move our distribution of products made in Belgium and in France by this firm, by the distribution teams, distribution network of this firm we just bought. And there was a tremendous increase in revenues. We did not have to pay the distributor. We wrote the policy, distribution policy also. We manage the teams, the distribution teams. So this is a consequence in increasing in revenues. It can be also brand image improved. You are not known in the market. You try to sell your products. Your brand is very unknown by your customers, and you buy a local producer, which is very well known, or local distributor, or both, and use his image. You offer a larger branch product and services, or better adapted through an acquisition to the demand of the local customers. You can also buy one of the competitors in Britain, lower the competition level. So you can obtain with an acquisition, you can obtain increase in revenues, you can obtain cost savings, but all of them bring you new value. New value. It means it is positive synergies. On the other side, that's what I explained, you have negative synergies, and generally they are connected to management, organizational structure, behavior, values, that kind of thing. And they are difficult to estimate. So you have a problem of M&A process. You have very different situation for M&A process. However, you are a marginal player on the M&A market. That means your internal growth, domestic growth, is the largest part of your growth. Or in the long run, as it is for BSN Danone, your growth is mainly explained by M&A. 2/3 was explained by M&A. That means you are proactive. And, we have been living for years in that group, and we are still living the same way. We have an average of 50 acquisitions a year. 50 acquisitions a year. It's about one acquisition per week. So after that, all of them are not merger, or are not total merger, or a partial merger. But you understand, that means one per week. Some of them are small, some of them are medium, some of them are large. But anyway, that means you have deals, you have negotiation, even if some of them are friendly, and from time to time you have a very big one, large one, which is strategic, and you have battle on the stock market, and you have negotiations with regulators. So that means, it's not an opportunity you decide to deal with. It's a regular business, and there is a structure dealing permanently with acquisition, merger, disinvestment, joint venture, spin-off, and so on. And in a group like BSN Danone, it's not a very large team. It's 12 persons, 2 assistants, and 10 persons in charge of projects. But it is a permanent team. And generally, all these persons have an experience in the group. It means they know what is a business, they know what is a strategy, they know what is a culture. They have an experience in marketing, or an experience in running factories, or they have an experience in control, or so on. So it's a diversified team in terms of field of expertise, but they have a good knowledge, they had experience in position into the group before. You can also say that this has to be prepared. And we created a process which is updated regularly with 3 categories of potential acquisition. Those which are very central. It means the kind of firm you really want to buy. You cannot do it now because the management and the shareholders don't want to sell. But they are family owned, the new position can change in years to come. So you follow these firms. You can have a large firm also, which decides at the point in time to resell the department, subsidiary. And you think it will be a great opportunity for you to extend your market share and to increase your revenues, for example. So you follow them. So you have a list generally, and remember we had a list of about 8 to 10 firms in the world, which are in the red zone. It means we follow them every day. We get sources of information to understand what they do immediately. We had also in that list a limited number of large firms which are bigger than we are and could have the project to launch a particular bid on our firm. This was the case of Nestlé, this was the case of Coca-Cola and Pepsi-Cola and Unilever. 4 in the world. And we follow them carefully also. After that, you have what we call an orange color, zone with firms which are less strategic, perhaps, but we want to buy if we had the opportunity. And when the first zone, the yellow one, including many more, the red zone is about 10, 12, no more. The orange zone is about 100, and now you have about 500 firms all over the world. We have a look from time to time because it could be of interest, but they are not priorities. So this is very, very important to understand and to follow these elements. We know a second point here on that slide that there could be the process could be friendly or hostile. The important point here, but you know what it is now, they are subject to clearance from regulatory authorities, national and European or American, if you're in the US and in other parts of the world, with the local system. You have an explanation here of what's happened for listed company when there is a takeover bid, point 1. The case of friendly bid, point 2. The case of a hostile bid, point 3, but 2. It's more summary for you. You already know all these points right now. So you are now with slide number 10. So this is the game for hostile takeover, which is a kind of game theory case, and how it can be prepared and anticipated. So first, you have to gain the perspective of various players, because very often you are in competition with our firm, hostile takeover. Other bidders. Identify the scenario, the motive, the behavior of each player, not only the target, but also the competitors. Master the important rules and defenses that constrain the players. Could be financial constraints, it could be regulatory constraints, it could be the position of a few shareholders, it could be government constraints. You have to understand that, and you have to anticipate the path that the outcome might take. What can happen after the beginning of a battle? What could be the next step? And what could be the issue? So it's a kind of scenario game theory analysis you have to go through. Now you have different players involved, and we have 2 slides on that, number 11, number 12. Bidder, or attackers, you understand what it means. The target, which is also called the defender. The free riders could be allies, which comes with the bidder, just to participate, and get a profit from the deal. I mean, they will buy shares at the beginning of the bid, then they will sell the sale at the end at a higher price, of course, to the bidder. You have also to take into account, and this is much more complex, groups within the target and the conflict between these groups, managers, directors. Some of them are supposed to lose their job at the end of the process if it is successful. So you find that if you come back to theory, we met already efficiency theory, signal theory, but here you find agency problems. It means conflicts at different levels between participants. It's not only conflict between bidder and the target, it could be conflict between different bidders. It could be conflict between bidders and targets on one side and regulator on the other. That's what we saw with Schneider, Legrand, Tetra. Inside of the target, conflict between managers, directors, and so on. Okay. You find also after insider and outside directors, which is a specific case, you find also a problem of shareholders. Shareholders, they have different behaviors. I will come back several times on that question. Very often there is not a shareholder group, at least for large group listed on the stock market, but you have different goals and behavior and horizon of the shareholders. And they have also relative powers which are different. You can make a simple and first distinction, which is between small and large shareholders. Individual shareholders, they get 10 shares or 20 shares of a large group. It doesn't have any impact on the annual meeting. Their rights of votes is very, very small compared to large shareholders. So they are just interested into wealth. They want to increase the value of their investment. Large shareholder could have a kind of double goal to control more power and also to have an increase in the value of their investment. So the positions is not the same. Some shareholders are short-term, some others are long-term also. So they are not looking, the consequences of a take of a bid the same way. The kind of other, which is 3.3 here, other potential buyers who have interest in acquiring the company but have not entered the bid at the beginning. This is the case of the White Knights. This is what we saw with Saint-Gobain and Pont-à-Mousson and Suez. You have also those who are interested in making profits on small, short-term differences in the prices of the share, and they like the volatility which is brought by the operation. Hedge funds. You will see in one of the cases I will show you on Danone again, we had the situation. You have very low volatility because it is food, recurrent, dividend paid, regular growth also of the price of a share. And the group bought a very large firm. It was difficult to explain how it will be financed. And immediately we had high volumes and high volatility. And in following days, it was clear that hedge funds were coming, investing for a few days, selling their position afterwards when they get a profit and starting again. So you have this kind of hedge funds or arbitragists, which are coming. You could have something which I say not. I can have here, which is what we call the activists fund. Activist funds are more and more common, in the Western world, and their funds come, generally to become shareholders, but very often minority shareholders, 5-10% stake. And they try after that to make alliance with other shareholders. And they convince them that the management is not as good as it should be. And their goal is to change the management, is to improve the performance of a firm, and then to resell and obtain a profit. It's a kind of long or medium term hedge funds. They are longer than the activist funds. I'll show you several operations in that case. In the M&A process, you have to be very well prepared. That's what I said. You need targets. You need to follow the targets. You need priority, concentrate your analysis on what is important. It means also you need to be clear on the definition of the objectives and the goals you follow. For the red target, you need preliminary analysis, estimation of possibility of synergies, the potential timing, the probability of success, evaluation of this target, how to organize the management afterwards when you acquire. It will be a subsidiary 100% controlled or with a majority control, or there will be a merger. You should prepare an offer with an investment bank, including the preparation of the due diligence process. Have at least kind of number one scenario for a final offer, and the negotiation process you want to develop. Generally, you need an investment bank. You need an investment bank, and an investment bank play an important role in the M&A operations. The acquiring company and the target company normally appoint an investment bank, very often in large operations, more than one, and they are advisors. And they advise at all stages of the operation, which means valuation, synergies, potential structures, due diligence, funding, guarantees, post-merger operation, new model. These operations for investment bank present a large part of their revenues. And you see, for example, last year was a very good year for investment bank, 2021 also, because we have a large number of operations in the world scene. All these investment banks, they have a specific investment department, and the largest one, they have departments with a large number of experts, high-level staff, and they are generally specialized by economic sector, with a team dedicated to the economic sector under restructuration. Very often, the investment bank bring ideas also of information to the customers. They are not only advisors, but they are preparing, potential operations they present to the potential bidder, to the customer. Okay. Number 15 now, was number 14. Number 15 here. So just remember that number 15 and number, we are dealing with two elements. The first one is due diligence. It means before you go through negotiation face to face, you have a kind of preparation, what we call due diligence. It means it's a period of time. It could be short or long. It depends on the situation. We'll come back on that. When you get information, you can talk to managers or to shareholders, and have possibility to analyze the accounting situation, the accounts, to come to make this examination with your own audit firm, for example. That's a very important period. And at the end of this period, you can always say, okay, I had a look, but with the information I'm not interested anymore, so thank you very much. I can say, okay, we can start negotiating, right now under such or such condition. This will be my last slide for today. We keep the other ones for another session. We are always, trying to calculate. I mean, always and regularly during a negotiation, either during the due diligence steps or afterwards during the negotiation itself, we are following, calculating and recalculating the gain of the operation. What's happened afterwards? Does the value of A plus B, if we decide to acquire and to merge, which is the most simple situation, is higher than the situation before? It means the value created by two independent firms. So this is the main question. And this is due, calculation, the difference is due, of course, to synergies. It brings us back to these positive and negative synergies management, which are very often negative, cost reduction, and increase in incoming revenues, which are, of course, positive. And this is what we need. This is something we need to calculate and to update when we have new information, because it explains the surplus of price we accept above the intrinsic value. In fact, we can admit to share part of the synergies or potential synergies with the seller. And also, what we're interested in is the increase, again, as it is called here, the increase in value, but it is the net present value of this difference. It means we are interested in the net present value of the synergy, because generally you don't obtain 100% of the synergies immediately, but they are spread over 2 or 3 years. Some of them are obtained very quickly, some of them need some kind of modification of the operations, the management, of the distribution, and it takes time. So what we are interested in is the net present value of the synergies, and we update regularly, if it is necessary, every day during the due diligence process and negotiation process with net present value of the synergies. Now, this is very, very important, because it is your margin into the negotiation. Okay, this is what I wanted to show you today in the third part of the presentation. So what we have done after a summary of what was presented before and discussed before in session 1 and session 2, in this session 3, I wanted to show what's happened between 80 and 83. Decision to concentrate on the food. Decision, of course, to sell the flat gas. First difficulties with the legal body in Brussels representing the common market at the time, and now the European Union, Department number 5, with a position which is giving a strong privilege, particularly at the time, on the competition and not on the constitution of leaders. The consequences in terms of operation, 3 years to go through the deal, the introduction of 2 outsiders, the fact it was made in cash, partly by transfer of cash, partly by transfer of debt. The consequences also after that on the image of the group on the market, with the semi-strong efficiency we noticed, and also the signal theory analysis we can have the last step of the operation. Second, I tried to give you some more information and understanding on the concentration, cartels, analysis, rules, dominant position also. Gives you some examples. I show you how it moved progressively and mindful two examples, two cases, which are the Schneider, Legrand, and the Tetra Van case. And last, I came with the course itself, summarizing, coming back on a few points and extending them on the what is a merger, what is an acquisition, what is a merger, however connected, can be the possibility for them to be hostile or to be friendly, the horizontal, the vertical ones, and the conglomerates also, which are very useful to understand, and the different steps of preparation, the updating of the list of targets, the due diligence process, and the importance of synergies, calculation of synergies and sources of synergies. That is what I wanted to do for today. So the session is over, and we meet again tomorrow at, for me it will be 1 p.m. For you it will be 7 p.m. 6-hour difference now at the time of year. So I wish you a good night. It will be a pleasure to meet you tomorrow. Send you new slides, and we'll move to another part, another section of this course. Thank you very much, and I hope you feel good, despite all the difficulties we find everywhere in the world in terms of sanitary situation right now. Thank you. Good night.
Thank you, Professor. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you,
Thank you,
Professor.
Professor.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor.
Bye.
And take care. Take care of you, of your family and friends and colleagues. Goodbye.